Millionaire hides his secret for years, but when the truth comes out, everything changes. She exposed the truth, but in doing so, lost everything. Was justice worth the price of sacrifice? Charlotte Green's phone buzzed on her desk, a single headline flashing across her screen. Millionaire's secret donations to struggling families exposed. What's his real motive? She sat up straight, eyes narrowing as she read. Victor Hamilton, the reclusive billionaire known for his luxury lifestyle and harsh business dealings, was suddenly making headlines for a completely different reason: generosity. The article claimed that Hamilton, whose empire spanned multiple industries, had been making substantial anonymous donations to families in need, quietly alleviating their debts and securing their homes. Charlotte, as a senior investigative reporter for the New York Times, knew better than to take anything at face value, especially from someone like Hamilton. His name had always been synonymous with ruthlessness, not compassion. She clicked the link to the full report, scanning through the details. The donations, though sizable, had no clear pattern. Some families were given financial relief in the form of monthly payments. Others received gifts in the form of down payments for homes or college tuition for their children. No one knew how Hamilton had selected these families or why he had chosen to remain anonymous. But Charlotte wasn't concerned with the families. She was concerned with the man behind the donations. This was the same Victor Hamilton who'd once used underhanded tactics to bankrupt entire communities for personal profit. He had no moral compass. Every move he made was calculated, a game of power. So, why was he suddenly acting like a philanthropist? Charlotte's phone buzzed again. A text message from her editor: "Tom, you're on this. Get the story. Find out what's going on with Hamilton." She wasn't sure if Tom believed Hamilton had truly turned over a new leaf, or if he just wanted a juicy story. But either way, Charlotte was determined to dig deeper. The public's sudden admiration for Hamilton had her suspicious. She began running background checks, calling her contacts in local charities and government agencies, and even investigating Hamilton's financial records. Every lead seemed to go nowhere, but Charlotte was persistent. Then, just as she was about to close her laptop for the night, a new file appeared on her screen. An encrypted email from an anonymous source. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. The subject line: "I know the truth about Victor Hamilton's donations." The message was short but chilling. He's paying for something that can ruin him. Find out why he's really giving. Charlotte felt a shiver run down her spine. She had been right to suspect something more was at play here. Whatever Victor Hamilton's motivations were, they weren't as innocent as they appeared. The email ended with one final line: "I'll be in touch." Charlotte closed her laptop, her mind racing. She had just uncovered the first hint of a much darker truth. Victor Hamilton's generosity was a facade, and she was about to uncover what lay beneath it. Victor Hamilton stared out of his penthouse window, the glittering skyline of Manhattan stretching before him. The view was stunning, the city alive with lights and motion, but all he could see was the face of a woman, his mother, and the way she had looked at him that day, so full of expectation, yet so utterly disappointed. The weight of that look still crushed him every time he thought of it. He had been just 24, still arrogant and careless, the world laid out at his feet. He had just signed the biggest deal of his career, a merger that promised to secure his place among the wealthiest men in the world. But there had been a party that night, too, a celebration that spiraled out of control. He remembered the way the alcohol had burned in his throat, how the laughter and music had muffled everything around him. Then, as he was leaving, driving recklessly through the city streets, it happened. The accident. The details were hazy, but he could still see the flash of headlights, the crash of metal against metal, the terrified scream that had followed. He had been speeding, yes, but it wasn't just that. It had been his choice to drive that night, his decision to ignore the signs that he was too drunk to be behind the wheel. And it cost them the family in the other car. The parents had died instantly. The children had been thrown from the car and left with injuries so severe that they never walked again. Victor had been arrested, but his wealth, his connections had shielded him. He had walked away with nothing more than a few months of probation and a damaged reputation. The family that had suffered, they were left with nothing. That night had shattered him, But it wasn't just the accident. It was the guilt, the crushing guilt that followed him every moment, even as he climbed the ladder of success. He had never been able to escape the faces of those children, their broken bodies, their grief-stricken faces. They had never known him, but he would never forget them. That was the first time he had truly understood what it meant to lose everything. And now, years later, after all his wealth and power, after every successful deal and every business victory, Victor still could not rid himself of that haunting image. His charitable donations, the ones Charlotte had uncovered, had been an attempt, no, a desperate plea, for redemption. A way to pay for the sins he had buried deep inside. Sins that could never be erased by money alone. Every check he wrote, every anonymous donation, was his attempt to make things right, to give what was taken away. But deep down, he knew it would never be enough. Not for them, not for him. Victor let out a heavy breath, his eyes closing as the familiar weight of guilt settled into his chest. He could never undo the past. As he turned from the window, his phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his reverie. It was a news alert. Millionaire's secret donations exposed. Is there a hidden agenda? He knew it was coming. His darkest secret was no longer just his. Charlotte Green, the investigative reporter, was digging deeper, and the truth was about to surface. He didn't know what she would find or how it would end, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the world learned what he had done and why he was trying so desperately to fix it. Charlotte hadn't expected the email to be real. She had opened it out of instinct, a fleeting hope that it would hold a clue, any clue that would lead her deeper into Victor Hamilton's twisted motives. What she hadn't expected was for it to change everything. The next morning, she sat in her cramped apartment, the hum of the city outside muffling the racing thoughts in her mind. The message from the anonymous source had haunted her all night. He's paying for something that can ruin him. Find out why he's really giving. She knew she needed more, and fast. The donations weren't random. They couldn't be. Victor Hamilton wasn't a man who acted without purpose. Everything he did to gain something, even when it appeared to be selfless. And now, Charlotte had to figure out what he was hiding. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unfamiliar number. Charlotte hesitated before opening it. It was the same cryptic tone. I'm watching. Follow the trail. You'll know when to act. Be careful. The words sent a chill through her. Someone was watching her now. Whoever this was, they knew more than she did. Charlotte gritted her teeth, her determination growing. She couldn't back down now, not when she was so close. She spent the next few days following the smallest of leads, piecing together fragments of information like a jigsaw puzzle. There was something deeper, something darker, beneath Hamilton's charity. She reached out to anyone who might know the truth. Old friends, sources in the charity world, anyone who had crossed paths with him. And then she found it. A contact of hers from a local homeless shelter mentioned a strange visitor, a man who had been discreetly making substantial donations over the past few months. The man had always refused to give his name, but had insisted on one thing. The money should go only to families who had lost someone. That was it. The pattern was beginning to emerge. The donations weren't random acts of kindness. They were specifically targeted at families who had experienced deep, irreplaceable loss. Charlotte's mind raced. Was this some form of penance for Victor Hamilton's past? She had no answers yet, but she knew she was on the right track. This was the thread that could unravel everything. But there was still one crucial detail she had to uncover. What was Hamilton hiding from the world? What, or who, was he really paying for? And why did he choose now to come forward with these donations? Charlotte's phone rang again. It was Tom, her editor. He sounded unusually anxious. Charlotte, you need to be careful. Someone's been asking about you. Someone who knows what you're investigating. I've got sources saying Hamilton's not happy you're digging. If he finds out what you're really looking for, it's not going to end well for you. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't anticipated the danger of digging into Hamilton's past, but now she realized how far he would go to keep his secrets hidden. He had power, influence, people who would protect him at all costs. She had put herself in the crosshairs of a man who was used to getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. Charlotte took a steadying breath, locking eyes with her reflection in the mirror. She had been through worse. She had seen the ugly side of the world. And if she had learned anything, it was this. The truth always came at a price. And if she had to pay that price to expose Victor Hamilton's secret, then so be it. Victor Hamilton's days had become a blur of meetings, phone calls, and media appearances, but his mind was never truly there. Every conversation felt distant, like he was listening from a place far beyond the polished walls of his empire. Every time he spoke, every deal he made, his thoughts circled back to the donations, to the children, to the family, to the thing he could never fix. He had thought that hiding behind anonymity would protect him, that the world would see only his acts of charity, not the darkness beneath. But Charlotte Green was getting too close. Her investigation was like a thorn in his side, a constant reminder that nothing was buried deep enough to escape the light of day. And now, with each piece of information she uncovered, the walls of his carefully constructed world began to crack. His assistant, Sarah, walked into the room holding a folder. She had the look of someone who knew more than she was willing to say, her eyes flicking nervously to his face as she set the folder down on his desk. "We've received some calls from the press," she said, her voice tight. "They've started asking questions about the donations." Victor's hand clenched into a fist. He hadn't expected the media to catch on so quickly. Not after all these years of carefully erasing every trace of his past. Yet here they were, asking the questions he had spent decades running from. "Are they getting any closer?" he asked, his voice low, like the growl of an animal on edge. Sarah hesitated before answering. "There's a reporter, Charlotte Green. She's been following the donations. She's getting too close." Victor's stomach twisted. Charlotte Green was one of the best in the business, and if she was onto him, it wouldn't be long before the truth came out. His past, the accident, the family he'd ruined, it would all come crashing down. And with it, his empire. He had tried so hard to bury the guilt, to make amends in whatever way he could. But deep down, he knew that no amount of money, no number of donations, could ever erase the damage he'd caused. Nothing could ever bring back the lives he had taken. Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressing against his temple. He knew he had to stop her, not just for his business, but for his own soul. The truth had the power to destroy him, not just financially, but emotionally. There was no way around it. The time had come for him to make a choice. Expose himself and face the consequences, or destroy anyone who threatened to expose him first. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The phone rang once, twice, then a deep voice answered. "It's time," Victor said, his voice cold. "We need to silence Charlotte Green. Permanently." Charlotte stood in front of her apartment window. The city stretched out before her, but she barely noticed the bustle of New York. Her mind was racing, consumed by the weight of her investigation. The more she uncovered about Victor Hamilton, the more she realized just how deep the darkness ran. His donations weren't the acts of a changed man. They were a desperate attempt to undo the damage he had caused. But why now? Why hadn't he made amends earlier, before the money and power had consumed him? Her phone buzzed again, a new message from her anonymous source. "They know. Be careful." Her heart skipped a beat. The threat was no longer veiled in mystery. It was real. She couldn't keep pretending she wasn't in danger. But what terrified her more than the risk to her life was the knowledge that she was just beginning to scratch the surface of a much larger story. Victor Hamilton's past wasn't just a matter of an accident and a few misdeeds. It was something much worse. And the closer she got to the truth, the more she realized that uncovering it might cost her everything. The call from her editor had been brief, but pointed. "Charlotte, you need to back off. I've got word that Hamilton is moving fast. He doesn't take threats lightly." But Charlotte wasn't someone who backed down. She had seen what power and corruption could do. She had witnessed it destroy lives, destroy families. And she wasn't about to let Victor Hamilton get away with it. Not when so many others had already paid the price. As the sun set, painting the skyline in hues of orange and pink, Charlotte made her decision. She would go deeper, no matter the cost. But she had to be smart, careful. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. She left her apartment, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had to do. She was meeting an old friend, a source who had promised her new information on Hamilton's past. His name was Alan, and he was one of the few people who knew the true extent of Hamilton's guilt. Alan had worked for one of Hamilton's companies years ago, and it was through him that Charlotte had first learned of the tragic accident. When she arrived at the dimly lit cafe, Alan was already sitting at a corner table, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He looked up as she sat down, his eyes wary but determined. "I know you're close, Charlotte," he said in a hushed tone, "but you don't understand. This isn't just about an accident. Hamilton's past is tangled with more than just money. He's done things, horrible things. And now, people are coming after you because of it." Charlotte leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean? What did he really do?" Alan glanced around nervously before speaking again, his voice barely audible. "There's a reason Hamilton hasn't been caught by the law. He's protected by people who will stop at nothing to keep him hidden. But he's not just paying for his sins. He's paying to protect himself. Someone knows everything, and they're ready to use it against him. You need to stop before it's too late." Charlotte felt a chill run through her, but she didn't let it show. Alan was frightened. He wouldn't have warned her if he didn't know something serious was at play. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was this close. She stood up, her resolve hardening. "I'll take my chances," she said, her voice unwavering. Alan grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "Don't say I didn't warn you." But it was too late. Charlotte had already made her choice. And now, there was no turning back. Victor Hamilton stared out from his office, his gaze piercing the city skyline that stretched before him. The evening lights of Manhattan shimmered like a vast sea of possibilities, his empire. The world was his, but none of it mattered now. He felt the weight of 1,000 sins pressing down on him, suffocating him with each breath he took. His mind raced, thinking of Charlotte Green, her relentless pursuit of the truth. He had underestimated her. He had thought that her investigation would falter, that she would lose interest as quickly as most of the others had. But Charlotte wasn't like the others. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or his power. And now, she was digging deeper, pulling at threads that threatened to unravel the life he had built. Victor ran a hand through his hair, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety twist in his chest. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't afford to let this reporter expose him, not when everything was so close to being erased. His donations, his carefully orchestrated charity work, had been part of his redemption, or so he had hoped. But Charlotte was too sharp, and now she was getting too close to the truth. Her questions, her investigation, they were becoming a ticking time bomb. Every second that passed made him feel like he was losing control. But that's what he did, he controlled. He always had. And he would control this situation too, no matter the cost. His phone buzzed on the desk, a message from Sarah. "She's meeting Alan tonight." "He's talking." "Alan." Victor's stomach churned. The man had been a loose end for far too long. A part of Victor's past he couldn't fully erase. Alan knew things that could ruin him. Victor stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He walked to the window and looked down at the city below, a grim determination settling over him. Charlotte thought she was in control. She thought she could unearth his secrets. But what she didn't know was that the deeper she dug, the closer she came to a man who would do anything, to keep his sins buried. He turned away from the window, his mind calculating his next move. It would be easy to end this. A few phone calls, a few connections, and Charlotte Green would never speak another word about him again. But it wasn't just about stopping her. It was about protecting everything he had built, the millions, the reputation, the power. And for that, he was willing to go to extreme lengths. Meanwhile, Charlotte was no closer to the answers she so desperately sought. The cafe had been too quiet, too calm, as if everyone there had been waiting for something to break. Alan had looked at her with such fear in his eyes that it sent a chill down her spine. But what was he really trying to tell her? The truth had always been murky. Half whispers, fragmented stories, the edges of reality that no one dared to confront. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from her anonymous source. "Be careful. They're watching." Charlotte's fingers trembled as she held the phone. Her mind raced as she thought about Alan's warning. Someone was after her, and that someone wasn't just a random figure. It was clear now. Victor Hamilton's past wasn't just something he wanted to keep hidden. It was something worth killing for. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Her investigation had just become more than a story. It had become a fight for her life. As she left the cafe, the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to cross a line from which there was no return. The truth she was chasing was no longer just a matter of exposing a millionaire's hidden guilt. It was a matter of survival. And somewhere in the shadows, Victor Hamilton was waiting. The silence in Charlotte's apartment was deafening as she paced back and forth, her mind swirling with everything she had learned and everything she had yet to uncover. Every revelation only made the storm in her head fiercer. Alan's warning kept replaying in her mind. People are coming after you. He had said it like it was already too late to turn back, and now she knew that he wasn't just talking about the media or the public. The danger was real, and it was closing in. She had hoped that her investigation would shine a light on the injustices of a powerful man who believed his money could erase the past. But as she pieced together the fragments of Victor Hamilton's life, it became clear. This wasn't just about a man trying to redeem himself with charity. This was about something darker, something far more dangerous. Charlotte's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her editor. The Hamilton story is getting bigger. The board is pressuring us to back off. They're scared, Charlotte. We're being targeted. She stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the message sink into her bones. The press was already being silenced, and she knew it was just a matter of time before they tried to silence her too. The closer she got to the truth, the more she realized that Hamilton's power didn't just stem from his wealth. It came from a network of influence, a web of control that spread far and wide. He had been untouchable for years, and Charlotte was now stepping dangerously close to the heart of that power. Her thoughts raced back to the moment she had first encountered Hamilton's tragedy, the accident that had set everything in motion. He had killed someone, not just anyone, a mother, a father, and a child. And that was only the beginning. There were more victims, more lives lost in the wake of his choices. The donations weren't about redemption. They were about keeping a story from surfacing. A story too horrific for anyone to believe. Charlotte had always known that those in power never gave up without a fight, but now she was beginning to understand the extent of that fight. Victor Hamilton would stop at nothing to protect his secret, and her investigation had made her a threat. Her pulse quickened as she thought of what Alan had said. He had been the first to realize that Hamilton's web of lies went deeper than anyone had imagined. But Alan had also warned her to stop, to turn back before it was too late. It was clear that he wasn't the only one who knew what would happen if Charlotte didn't back off. She couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when she had come this far. Charlotte took a deep breath and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. A contact from her past. Someone who owed her a favor. Someone who could help her navigate the treacherous waters she was now swimming in. Victor Hamilton is the kind of man who doesn't just bury the truth, she muttered to herself as the phone rang. He destroys anyone who dares to dig it up. The voice on the other end of the line picked up. Charlotte? What's going on? I need information, Charlotte said, her voice steady but urgent. I need everything you have on Victor Hamilton. And I need it now. I'm in danger, and I'm running out of time. Victor sat in his darkened office, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. Every move he made now was calculated, but the guilt gnawed at him. The more he tried to silence Charlotte, the more it felt like he was digging himself deeper into a hole he couldn't escape. He knew she wasn't going to stop. Charlotte was too stubborn, too relentless, but she didn't understand what she was up against. She was poking at a sleeping monster, and when it woke up, it would devour everything in its path. Victor's mind drifted back to his earlier conversation with Sarah, who had informed him that Charlotte was going public with new findings. He had hoped the press would fall for his donations and charitable acts, but now they were starting to ask real questions. Questions that were far too close to the truth. And the truth, his truth, was something he could never let anyone see. Victor's hand shook as he reached for the phone. He had always been able to handle situations with precision, to control the narrative. But now, as the walls began to close in on him, he realized that no amount of money or influence would keep his sins buried forever. His empire was built on lies, and Charlotte Green was the one person who could tear it all apart. Charlotte's breath was shallow, each exhale a battle to stay calm. She had barely slept, consumed by the relentless urgency of her investigation. As the hours slipped by, her mind remained trapped in a loop of mounting pressure. Victor Hamilton's empire was crumbling before her eyes, but with it, so was the last semblance of control she thought she had. The phone call with her old contact had left her shaken. She had expected answers, but instead, she had received a chilling confirmation of her worst fear. Hamilton's past was even darker than she had imagined. The donations weren't the tip of the iceberg. They were a smokescreen, a carefully constructed lie to cover up the truth. A truth that could ruin not just Victor Hamilton, but countless others. Her hands trembled as she read over the documents sent by her source. Hidden accounts, shell companies, and a trail of bodies, both literal and metaphorical, stretching back decades. Charlotte could almost hear the whisper of each name she read, the victims who had been erased from history. But now, their voices were trying to break free, clawing their way to the surface. And she was the one holding the shovel. She had always prided herself on uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous it was. But now, as she pieced together the fragments of Hamilton's life, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something much bigger than herself. Something she might not be able to control. A knock at her door shattered the stillness. She froze. No one ever knocked. Her editor had stopped calling. Her sources had grown increasingly quiet, and the threats had become more frequent. Charlotte stepped slowly to the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. The moment she opened it, the world outside seemed to fold into the room, as if every shadow, every whisper, had followed her into the apartment. The man standing there wasn't a stranger, but he might as well have been. His face was weathered, his eyes dark, a reflection of a life lived in the shadows. It was Alan, the same man who had warned her, the same man who had shared the secrets of Hamilton's empire with her. "Alan," she whispered, stepping back to let him in. What are you doing here?" Alan looked around nervously before stepping inside. "You shouldn't have gone this far, Charlotte. It's not just your career on the line anymore. It's your life." She shut the door behind him, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean? What's happening?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking tired and defeated. "You don't understand. There's a whole network, Charlotte. You've uncovered something you're not ready for. Hamilton isn't just hiding his past. He's protecting people who have power. People who are untouchable. Who are they?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air, a heavy burden that she knew she wouldn't be able to escape. Alan hesitated, his eyes flicking to the window, as if he could feel the danger closing in. "It's not just Hamilton. It's bigger. There are people in his circle, politicians, businessmen, law enforcement, people who would do anything to keep this from coming out. And if they find out what you know, Charlotte," he trailed off, his voice cracking under the pressure of what he was about to say, "they'll come for you. No one is safe." Charlotte's chest tightened, the realization settling in like cold steel. This wasn't just about a man's guilt. It was about a system that had been built to protect the powerful, to shield them from the consequences of their actions. And now, she was standing in the middle of it, a single thread that could unravel everything. "I can't stop now, Alan," she said, her voice firm. "The truth needs to come out." Alan looked at her with a mix of pity and fear. "You think you're strong enough to expose it? To take down someone like Hamilton? You're playing with fire, Charlotte. And fire burns everything it touches." But Charlotte wasn't listening anymore. The weight of everything she had uncovered pressed down on her like a suffocating weight. Hamilton's empire was built on lies and cruelty, and if she didn't expose it, no one else would. She had to do this for the victims, for the families he had destroyed, for the truth. "I'm already in," she said, locking eyes with Alan. "And I'm not backing down." Alan sighed, his shoulders slumping as if he knew the battle was already lost. "Then you're already dead," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "But you won't be alone." Charlotte stared at him, her heart pounding. Alan had known the cost, and he was ready to pay it. She wasn't sure if he was warning her or offering his help, but it didn't matter. She was already too deep to turn back. And now, the only thing left was to finish what she had started. The truth would come out, no matter the cost. Charlotte stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of Alan's words sinking deeper into her chest. "You're already dead." The phrase echoed in her mind, louder than any warning, more terrifying than the thought of facing Victor Hamilton's empire. It wasn't the threat she feared. It was the truth buried in those words. In the end, it wasn't about the danger. It was about how far she was willing to go for the truth. And she knew, deep down, that there was no going back. Alan had offered his help, but his presence only amplified the silence in the room. He had warned her. He had told her how deep this rabbit hole went, how much darkness Hamilton and his network could bring to bear. But it was too late to pull back now. Charlotte had crossed the line the moment she had uncovered the first shred of evidence. "You're making a mistake," Alan said, his voice shaking, less sure now than before. "You think you can expose all this? You think the truth will protect you?" His eyes met hers, a deep, haunted look in them. The people behind Hamilton, they're not just businessmen. They're not just politicians. They're powerful, Charlotte, and they will stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came out. Her head was spinning with everything she had learned, everything Alan had told her, everything she had seen. Hamilton's donations, his so-called philanthropy, were nothing more than a shield. A shield for the victims he had left behind, for the lives he had destroyed, and for the darkness he had buried. She clenched her fists, the anger rising in her chest. Anger not just for the lies, but for the lives lost in the wake of Hamilton's carefully constructed empire. For the people who had been swallowed up by his greed and power. For every family who had been torn apart by the man who was supposed to be their savior. "I can't stop," she whispered, more to herself than to Alan. "Not now." Alan's face softened for a moment, as if he understood the battle that was raging inside her. But then his expression darkened, and his voice became cold. "Then you'll die with this story, Charlotte. No one will remember you. No one will care. You'll be just another casualty in a game they've been playing for decades." Charlotte's throat tightened. She had come so far. To back out now would mean everything she had uncovered, everything she had risked, would be lost. But even more than that, it would mean that the truth would die with her, and the world would never know what had really happened. "What if I can expose them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if I could bring it all out? What if I can make them pay for what they've done?" Alan didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, the look on his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his words slow and deliberate. "You'll have to be prepared for what comes next," he said. "Because once you start this, there's no stopping. You'll lose more than you ever thought you could. You'll lose everything." Charlotte swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She had known the risks. She had known the cost. But as she stood there, facing Alan's fear and desperation, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. It was no longer just about the truth. It was about redemption, for herself, for those who had been wronged, for the families who had been silenced for far too long. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now, more sure than it had ever been. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Alan stared at her for a long time, his eyes searching hers for something. For a flicker of doubt, perhaps. For a hesitation that might turn her away. But there was nothing but resolve. "Then I'll help you," he finally said, his voice resigned. "But you're on your own, Charlotte. You have to understand that. Once you're in, there's no going back." Charlotte nodded, her breath steady. She had crossed the line. There was no turning back. "Not now." "Then let's do this," she said, as the weight of the truth pressed down on her shoulders, a burden she was no longer afraid to bear. The air was thick with anticipation, a silence that screamed louder than the chaos unfolding beneath it. Charlotte stood at the edge of the precipice she had worked so hard to reach. The story was almost there. The final pieces had clicked into place, and the truth, the one truth she had fought for, was just beyond her reach. It was so close now, yet it felt like the world was closing in, pressing her from all sides. The phone in her hand buzzed again, a constant reminder that the game she was playing was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about survival. The people she had uncovered, the powerful men who had orchestrated this nightmare, were no longer distant threats. They were right here, and they were watching her every move. Her fingers hovered over the keys, each letter a decision, each word a weapon. This wasn't just about bringing down Victor Hamilton anymore. This was about taking down everything he represented, the corruption, the lies, the power that had kept so many in chains. But as she prepared to hit send, she hesitated. Would it be enough? The sudden knock on her door shattered her thoughts. She didn't need to open it to know who was on the other side. The tension, the suffocating pressure that had been building for days, had led to this moment. She had known, deep down, that this day would come. There was no escaping the consequences of exposing a man like Hamilton. Taking a steadying breath, Charlotte opened the door, steeling herself for what was about to happen. Alan was standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Charlotte, they know. They're coming for you." Charlotte's heart stopped. She had always known this was a possibility, but hearing the words out loud made the threat real. It wasn't just a vague warning anymore. It was a truth she could no longer deny. "I've already made my choice, Alan," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her pulse. "I can't stop now." Alan stepped inside quickly, closing the door behind him. "You don't understand. You think you're ready for this, but you're not. These people, this whole system, it's bigger than you, than anyone. You're playing with fire, Charlotte, and it will burn everything." Charlotte's eyes locked onto his. "I can't live with myself if I don't do this. I have to expose them, Alan. I have to." He reached out, grasping her shoulders, his grip tight. "I know you do, but you have to understand. Once you do this, you'll never be the same. You'll lose everything. Your career, your freedom, your life." His voice broke. "You'll be alone. They'll make sure of that." She swallowed hard. The weight of his words pressed down on her, but her resolve remained firm. She had already lost so much. Her past, her peace of mind, her safety. She couldn't let it all be for nothing. The families whose lives had been destroyed by Hamilton's greed, those who had been silenced, forgotten, deserved to be heard. They deserved justice, and Charlotte was the only one who could give it to them. "I've already lost everything," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't let them win. Not after everything I've uncovered." Alan stared at her, his face a mask of resignation. "I'm sorry, Charlotte. I tried to warn you, but you're right. You've made your choice." There was a long pause. Charlotte turned back to the desk, her hand hovering once again over the keyboard. The truth was finally ready. The email was composed, the evidence compiled. The world would know what Hamilton had done, what they had all done. And in that moment, she realized it wasn't just about exposing Hamilton anymore. It was about revealing the system that had allowed men like him to thrive. It was about showing the world how deeply entrenched corruption could be, and how, with one small act of defiance, it could be undone. Her finger pressed the send button. It felt like the world shifted beneath her feet, as if everything had suddenly become clear. There was no going back now. The story was out there. The truth was exposed. But as the email disappeared into the digital ether, Charlotte couldn't help but wonder what came next. She had done what she set out to do, but now she would pay the price. She would face the consequences of her actions, of the story she had just told the world. There would be no protection, no shield to keep her safe. But as she looked at Alan, standing by the door, she knew one thing for certain. She had done the right thing. And in the end, that would have to be enough. The door opened behind her, the harsh sound of it echoing in the silence. Charlotte didn't turn around. She knew what was coming. It didn't matter. She had crossed the line. And now, she was free. In a world where the truth often gets buried beneath layers of power and greed, Charlotte's choice to expose the darkness, despite knowing the cost, reminds us all of the power of integrity and the price of justice. Sometimes, standing up for what's right means standing alone, but it's in those moments that true freedom is earned. Now, I want you to think, what would you do if you were in Charlotte's shoes? Would you have the courage to face the consequences for the truth? If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect on the choices we make, the sacrifices we endure, then hit that like button, comment your thoughts below. Share your own truth with us, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this. Because sometimes the truth needs to be told, and it starts with you.